Please find your seats at this time. Our program will begin shortly. Please welcome to the stage this afternoon's panelists. Vicky Pesce, General Manager of Rio Tinto, Paul A. Lang, Chief Executive Officer at Arch Resources, Mitchell J. Krebs, Chief Executive Officer at Coeur Mining, Mark Bristow, President and CEO of Barrick Gold, Cassie Boggs, Interim President and Chief Executive Officer at Hecla Mining Company, and finally, your session moderator, Denise C. Johnson, Group President of Caterpillar Resource Industries at Caterpillar Incorporated.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're really pleased that you could join us here today. It is going to be a great session. I'm Denise Johnson, Group President for Resource Industries at Caterpillar and the Chair for MINExpo 2024. So it's my pleasure to moderate today's session with all of these outstanding individuals. So joining us today, and I know they introduced everyone very briefly, but let me just reinforce the powerhouse of leaders that we have with us today. Starting with Cassie Boggs, who's the Interim President and CEO of Hecla Mining Company. Followed by, everyone knows, Mark Bristow, President and CEO of Barrick Gold. Mitch Krebs, President and CEO of Coeur Mining, and he is also the outstanding outgoing chair of the National Mining Association. Also joining us is Paul Lang, current CEO of Arch Resources and the incoming chair for the National Mining Association. And finally, Vicky Pesce, President and General Manager of Resolution Copper. So thank you all for being here with us today. So this is a fantastic time for producers. There's new, I think, global recognition of the importance of mining and the products that all of you are producing and really trying to produce. Demand for mined minerals is strong and really materials are poised to soar. There are some immense opportunities in this environment, but also definitely some real challenges. And I want to just briefly touch on a few of the challenges. Policy uncertainty is one of them, globally as well as here in the US. Certainly, supply chain hurdles. Interest rates, capital formation certainly are providing challenges for all of us. Attracting and retaining today's and tomorrow's workforce. Certainly integrating new equipment and solutions and finding the sweet spot between meeting demand that we know is coming and optimizing existing operations. So all of you really have your hands full. So let's begin with a question around supply and demand. So if you would, asking for each of you to provide a snapshot on how your company sees the supply and demand trends for the primary commodity that you produce. And we're gonna do this in kind of lightning round forum. And we're gonna start with you, Cassie.
Okay, Hecla is primarily a silver producer. The supply of silver is about 1 billion ounces a year, but demand is 1.2 billion ounces. 55% of that demand is for industrial uses, primarily solar, EVs, and silver demand in solar is increasing every year by about 17%. So we see silver as really, it's in deficit now. We expect that to continue, and we believe demand for silver is going to continue to increase for any number of uses in the future.
Very good. Thank you. Mark?
So Denise, my view, the mining industry is ex-growth. And so we are looking at demand side drivers on all the main metals, and our focus is gold and copper. But we haven't invested in our future since 2000. In fact, copper and gold, we haven't replaced what we've mined since the turn of the century. So it's a real, and we get confused about M&A and growth. And M&A is just rearranging the deck chairs. Growth is about taking some risk and investing in the future. And I really believe this mining industry needs to do that.
Very good. Thank you, Mark. Mitch?
Yeah, hi. We produce gold and silver, so I won't repeat anything that's already been said. I think just on the silver side, just to put a finer point on the supply side, Cassie mentioned it briefly, but this will be the 4th year in a row of supply-demand deficits at a time when demand's continuing to grow sharply on the back of a lot of these electrification and renewable energy themes that Cassie touched on. What I think is pretty interesting is the fact that, with a lack of real new discoveries and exploration, there isn't a pipeline of new projects. And even if there is, I don't know if you saw recently this S&P Global Intelligence report that shows, at least here in the US, from discovery to first production, it's 29 years, right? So even if you are investing in exploration, even if there are new discoveries, those aren't going to hit the supply side of the equation for a long, long time, which really magnifies some of the attractive fundamentals that we see right now for all metals.
Thank you. Paul?
So Arch produces the 2 types of coal. We produce thermal coal for use in power plants and coking coal to make steel. And the U.S. is a little bit of a tale of 2 cities. The domestic thermal business has declined dramatically. 2010, it was about 1,000,000,001 tons. This year, it's projected to be about 400 million tons of production. And you stand back, while the U.S. is going down, 2022 and 2023 were record years for global coal consumption. So the market is the export market for U.S. producers. And that's what you're seeing a lot of U.S. producers going to. And very similar to the story you're telling, on the hard rock side, the fundamental lack of investment in the sector has stopped most projects. On the coal side, it's been a lot more difficult just because of the political side of it. So there's a fundamental lack of investment, and there's going to be a commodity cycle in all this, but at some point, the supply is going to catch demand, and there's going to be a little bit of or demand's going to catch supply, and there's going to be a bit of a shortage.
Very good. Thank you, Paul. Vicki?
So carrying on with the same theme, Rio Tinto is really a diversified metals producer from iron ore to aluminum, copper, and industrial minerals. So I'll focus a little bit on aluminum, but copper, you could almost tell the same story. Aluminum demand today, big volumes, 95 million tons globally, and that will go to 180 million tons globally. It's the business as usual, automotive, aerospace, but electrification and that need for a low carbon supply really drives that. And what that also is going to do is the competition for scrap will definitely increase over that same time frame. So if we're looking at the compound annual growth globally, about 3% over the next 5 to 10 years in aluminum, but in North America, the demand is even stronger, which is a really good market, about 4% over that same time frame. So Rio Tinto's got this very mines, smelters, refineries, and a very vertically integrated business, as well as recycling with a big footprint in Canada and the United States. So in a really good position to meet that demand with investments. So billions in new smelters and recycling capability in both countries.
Thank you, Vicki. It says a lot for the growth I think all of us are seeing and experiencing in this room, and certainly the potential for the future. So I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit about global uncertainty. And I want to set the context for this question. According to Ernst & Young's top 10 business risks and opportunities for mining and metals in 2024, geopolitics has moved into 7th place on the risk index. Now that's down from being in 2nd place in 2023. The change in the ranking is really indicating the lack of new geopolitical risks on the agenda this year. However, the ongoing issues, including tensions with China, the war in Ukraine and rising resource nationalism means companies must remain vigilant. So I'm going to start this question and kick it to Mark Bristow. Mark, Barrick has operations in 13 countries across the globe. What would you say are the most significant geopolitical risks that your company is facing?
First of all of the above. Secondly, I mean, you made a very good point when you started, and that is regulatory risk, which is just a polite way, PC correct way of saying geopolitical risk. And it starts in the United States. You just can't get anything permitted. And I believe that the number one risk is geopolitical. One, because of deglobalization, and you just can't connect the world together anymore. So, and I believe that because it's at 7, as most of the mining companies focus on the developed world, and they don't take the risk like Barrick of going into emerging markets and the developing world. And that's where you need to go if you're going to find world-class assets, because you can't permit them here at home, and you need it, and the world needs it, so you've got to do it. And I think the biggest single risk is the inability or the reluctance of the developed world politics to embrace the emerging markets and create investability in those markets. And miners can do so much, and we do a lot, and we bring regulation, responsibility, and everything that the emerging markets need. But without political support, we just can't compete against our competitors out of East Asia. And so that's the big, real challenge, and no one wants to deal with it. And so we all talk about safe places to invest, but the safe places to invest you can't permit. And to Vicky on the end of the row here, Resolution has been waiting to be developed for decades. It's world class. Its contribution to the copper production is absolutely necessary. We just can't get it permitted. So that's the risk.
So Mark, just a follow-up to that question. So as you continue to work in those more risky areas, how do you manage that risk more effectively? How do you mitigate the risk?
I think like everywhere in the world today, people want to participate in their country's economy, in no matter what level. And they also want to see responsible investment. And so the world's changing, and we need to embrace that. And license to operate is so important. And to do that, you need to divide the economic pie or the economic benefits equally. And we in the West, capitalist-driven, have always looked to maximize profits and minimize tax. And that game's over for miners, I believe, because we are, no matter how we own the mines we operate, they're actually a national asset. And so we have a responsibility to our host countries and their people to ensure that not only do we give work, but we give business to the business people, and we contribute to the central government treasury, and we make a difference in everyday life. And I see that change in Nevada. As you know, during COVID, the mining industry really kept this state afloat. And it's the same anywhere else in the world we go. So, and I think miners are, way ahead of most other industries, and recognizing the rules have changed, and we need to act as partners.
Very good. Thank you. So Mitch, I also want to ask a question in this area of global uncertainty to you. Resource nationalism is certainly making a comeback. Can you discuss your recent experiences in Mexico?
Yeah, sure. We have 3 operations here in the U.S. And then one in Mexico. Our experience in Mexico has certainly been one where things have gotten more challenging over the last few years. But, kind of to what Mark was saying, where hasn't it gotten a little more challenging over the last few years? What you have in Mexico is an industry in mining that is so central to that country's history, to its culture, to its economy. And like a lot of countries, it's going through an administrative transition right now to a new president starting October 1st. So we'll see how the new administration approaches mining, and if it's any different at all to the previous one. Expectations are that it might be a bit more pragmatic than the last 6 years. But it's sort of the same playbook no matter where you operate. If you do things right, if you employ people in a rewarding way and have a positive culture, and you support the local economy, and the community supports you, and you pay your, you do all the right things wherever you are in the world, you're going to be okay. Mexico's definitely changed a bit, like a lot of places, but it's still a place that certainly as a mining company, if you do it the right way, it's still a great place.
Thank you, Mitch. Okay, we're going to shift gears again and talk a little bit about workforce, and I'll set the context for this as well. Nearly every consulting firm that's looking at 2024 trends in the mining industry identified workforce shortages as a major challenge. Not only are companies dealing with a lack of workers in the post-COVID world, but are reporting that more than half of the country's mining and metals workforce is set to retire in 2029. That equates to about 221,000 workers. In April of 2023, the U.S. mining sector had 36,000 job vacancies, up from 27,000 the year previous. Additionally, the number of mining schools and the number of graduates keeps shrinking. So the question for all of you is, how have you adapted your recruitment strategies to deal with the increased competition for scarce talent? And Cassie, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Well, I think we realized that the sort of unending rat race of trying to have a benefit package or raise salaries just so that we can take workers away from our competitors really is a zero-sum game. You really need to focus on longer-term solutions. So we, like I think my colleagues here, we support state institutions, educational institutions, to try to encourage kids to go into mining. We are looking at focusing on collaboration with technology companies and other companies that use our products to see if we can develop workforces. But in my mind, the mining industry really just has to rebrand itself. And we have to be aggressive about rebranding itself. If young people want to be involved in renewable energy, then they should want to be involved in mining. We're key to those energy transitions, and I think if we could get Hollywood to stop always making mining companies the villains, whether it's Avatar or it's a dirty business, Hunger Games, we just need George Clooney, I guess, to come on in, and I'm willing to go to Hollywood and try to have that conversation. And finally, I think, one area that I'm particularly focused on is military veterans, because I think the military is a sort of natural place for people to move into civilian life. Military people, they know safety. They know about working in difficult remote locations. They understand chain of command. They understand logistics. All of those skills are really helpful to the mining industry. So we're looking at how to focus maybe on that. It was interesting, I got a call from a TV producer of Lifetime TV. Lifetime has a program called Military Makeover, and they have a new segment called Operation Career, where they're trying to focus on industries that help veterans move from military life into civilian life. So I think that could be an opportunity for the mining industry.
Excellent idea. Thank you. Mark, anything from your perspective?
So what a wonderful conversation this morning with Mark Rao. And that really takes it down to the number of things, and your point about we don't celebrate engineers, we don't celebrate artisans and real jobs, and we need to do that because that's how this great nation was built. And like any industry, it needs to be maintained. And I think to Cassie's point, as an industry, we tend to go to the same pool of aging workforce and think it's going to be better. That doesn't happen. That doesn't work that way. And so for us, we've reached out to the young people, and we need young people if we're going to pioneer a future-facing industry, because they are the future. And so we need to learn to do things differently. And you know, it's so exciting to see the average age of the workforce in Nevada gold mines come down here. And we've built world-class, fully automated mines in equatorial Africa. And you can train any smart person to be a great worker. And anyone who wants to work, to Mark's point, there's a great career in mining, and it's so different and varied, and so it's such a great story to tell, and he tells it so well. And we as miners just don't tell that story well enough. And I think if we go out there and engage with the smart kids of the future, we'll get better people, and better people will make our industry better. And it's a great circuitous endeavor.
That it is, that it is. Yeah. Mitch, anything from your perspective, anything you're doing?
Yeah, a couple things I could add to what Cassie and Mark said. And obviously internship programs, we're very committed, and we're throughout COVID to 15 to 25 interns every summer. Another thing that came out of COVID that was, one of the maybe few benefits was on-campus recruiting really went more virtual than it used to be. So we've now really expanded our footprint of places that we sort of recruit. We just do it virtually now. So we've more than doubled the number of campuses that we're recruiting from. We have a good veterans program, Cassie, that's a good point, called Core Heroes, where we have about 100 veterans, and we are always trying to recruit more for all the reasons Cassie mentioned. I also think, we moved our headquarters to Chicago over a decade ago, and you can say what you want about Chicago, but it is a very diverse, deep talent pool, and we have pulled in a lot of people from outside of mining, a lot more of a diverse profile. 40% of our headquarters employees are female. So, and also trying to think about, how can we position our company for younger people who maybe want to come and live in a city rather than in a rural location. And so Chicago has been a little bit of a differentiator and a way to connect with younger people, to try and convince them and even educate them about another career, another industry that they might not have otherwise been aware of.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Mitch. Paul.
Yeah, I think everybody addressed the question on the professional and engineer side very well. I think one of the things that intrigues me is the hourly workforce, and how do we recruit and retain them? And I get in the habit of, whenever I went to a mine, to ask the basic question of what their turnover was. And if it was high, try and figure out why that turnover was so high, because we spent all this time and effort trying to find these people. We spent a lot of money training them. Then if we lost them after 6 months or a year, we failed. So we put a lot of focus on retention, and it paid off. And a bad mine in our company is about an 8 or 9% turnover, and that has been one of the metrics that we judge general managers by. The other is, and I think Cassie mentioned this, is it's a zero-sum game if you just steal people from another company. If all you're doing is offering $1 more, somebody's going to offer that person $1 more to leave you eventually. So you got to give them a reason to stay. And one of the most effective things we've found is recruiting, generally out of trade schools or even high schools, for kids that are quite willing to, be trained and come into the workforce, and basically gone to the habit of just taking local kids and growing our own. And that has been a very effective program.
Those are great points. Vicki.
So just tearing off of what Paul just said and everybody else, it's about growing our own. So I'll tear to Resolution Copper in it. We're in a location, it's called the Copper Triangle, but it is a rural part of Arizona that has largely been forgotten. There's double-digit unemployment. up to 80% in the 7 communities that surround the location. It is just people want an opportunity and a chance to stay in the community that they were born and raised in, where they have this social network of family and raise their children. And they're told to leave because there's nothing for them. So a number of years ago, long before I started, there's an apprenticeship program, and that has changed things for the local community. Our lead electrician, lead underground miner are all from the local community. And today, our apprentices that are coming up today, our experienced miners they babysat them at one point. So they all know each other. Of course, our workforce today, we've got about 400 people that report to work every single day. 90% are local, and they're our best ambassadors. They go out into the local K through 12 schools, and they'll see Chris Villaverde, who's a hoist operator, and the kids there know exactly who he is. I could be just like him. That's really what they say. So they give some inspiration and some hope. And we just did 20 apprentice roles in this local area, and we limited it 2 weeks, and we had over 650 applications. So we kind of have the opposite problem. We have a very, very high demand for these jobs. At some point, we'll have thousands. We're just not there yet.
Oh, that's exciting and really great. Great ideas. Thank you, panelists, for your feedback. Okay, we're going to switch gears yet again and talk about a topic that is often a highlight, and it is around ESG and social license to operate. So Ernst & Young's 2024 report said that ESG is the biggest risk for miners, as well as their opportunity to drive differentiation and improvements that will create long-term value for all stakeholders. So Vicki, I'm going to ask you this first question. The same report identifies local community impact as the ESG factor facing the most scrutiny from investors in 2024. Could you tell us a little bit, and I think you started on this line when you talked about some of the workforce work, but how Resolution Copper's landmark Good Neighbor Agreement was signed earlier this year, and what impact that's had for you?
Yeah, no, I think, and Mark said it earlier, it's about sharing the benefits. Gone are the days when they're mining towns. So the towns in and around our neck of the woods, they are towns that will have a mine, but will have a diversified economy. So the way that you design a mine today is co-design it with local communities, arm in arm, at the table. And that's what we've done really over the last 10 years. So the original version of this mine looked nothing like what it looked like 10 years after the co-design process. And so the Good Neighbor Agreement is really just formalizes this good faith, two-way dialogue and partnership that we have had with the 7 local communities that are on our doorstep and our nearest neighbors. We are accountable to them. We do, listen to them, and they are accountable to us. And so both of us together, with that co-design element, will continue over the life of the mine. And from that, economic empowerment agreements and education and cultural heritage. And today we have local communities that monitor our operations, groundwater and surface water, so that builds trust and transparency, as well as Native American monitoring. Some of you in the audience that participated in that, monitoring seeps and springs in riparian, and we come together and we can compare and contrast. And again, legitimacy and transparency and trust is built through that type of program.
Thank you, Vicki. Paul, I'll go to you next. So Arch Coal recently achieved Level A verification for all protocols compromising the Towards Sustainable Mining, or TSM initiative, at the Lear mine, which is really a major accomplishment. It's the first U.S. mine of any type to achieve and verify this performance level. Tell us more about how adoption of TSM will help Arch Coal and you achieve your company's sustainability goals.
Yeah, I stand back and look at this subject, sustainability. It's always been a core part of our operations now. Before it was sustainability, we talked about it in terms of safety, environmental compliance, and taking care of our employees. And, it's for the same reason everybody up here believes in those things. It's because ethically it was the right thing to do. And second, it was part of our social license to operate. What TSM did for us was a little bit step further, and that was we opened the door to a third party to come in and say, these guys are really doing what they say they're going to do. So our stakeholders, which are, very varied, just like all the other mining companies, we have investors, we have customers, and we have community friends and neighbors that rely on us. And TSM brought us that ability to absolutely open the doors and let them look very much to what you were saying, to let them see what's going on. And, frankly, there's two practical sides to it. One is, our customers, particularly many of the steel companies, it's part of what they're being asked to do for their customers. So a simple example is there's a steel company that we supply to that, the automobile manufacturers ask them about the sustainability practices of not only themselves but their suppliers. TSM provides that ability. And I think the second practical aspect of it is that, it's a little bit of the belief that the regulatory environment in the US or wherever is only going to get more difficult. TSM brought a rigor to what we were doing. There was nothing new we really started out to do, but we did a much better job of tracking what we're doing. So it was a kind of a pragmatic view of bringing these things forward. In the end, TSM framework is a great framework, and it's done very well for us. And look, it may not be the ultimate framework, particularly if the SEC or other regulatory bodies get involved, but it set a very good foundation for us, and that's why we headed down that path.
And as an add-on question to that, Paul, do you think it's changing the perception in the community or maybe more broadly with perceptions of U.S. consumers?
I mean, I think it's beyond the U.S. consumer. I think particularly in Europe and Asia, I would get, when I was trying to sell coal years ago, you'd get questions about, you don't have a child labor policy. Well, no, because there was no need. And we found out, there were some basic things that were being thought of and asked that we were missing. And that's what brought in some of the TSM framework.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So Cassie, Hecla's ESG commitment certainly starts at the top, and certainly with the executive leadership, but also the board of directors. So if you think of that, how do you think the ESG model has demonstrated Hecla's commitment to sustainable mining?
Yeah, we'd like to talk about our long-term commitment to sustainability, and that gives us the framework. We've been around for 133 years. We've been 133 years in the Silver Valley of Idaho. We've been 35 years at Greens Creek outside of Juneau. And it's only possible in this day and age to sustain a mining company that long if you have organic, sustainable partnerships with the local communities. We like to think we sort of did ESG before ESG became a thing. When you look at our flagship mine, Greens Creek is on Admiralty Island, which the entire island is a national monument. So we operate the 11th largest silver mine in the world within the boundaries of a national monument. It's got one of the highest concentrations of brown bears in the world. There are more bears than people. And as a consequence, we operate that mine to the highest environmental standards. We pioneered the dry stack tailings disposal system, and we're replicating those environmental standards now at our newest mine in the Yukon, Keno Hill. And finally, I would say one more thing about, sometimes there's this new pushback against ESG and diversity and reporting. But when I thought about this panel today, there's 3 women now. There was supposed to have been a 4th, Kathleen Quirk, who's the CEO of Freeport. And I think, 3 women running mining companies in today's world, you wouldn't have seen that 10 years ago, and you wouldn't have seen it probably even 5 years ago. And so I would submit that the push for telling people about what we do in ESG and showing that we have diverse people both in our management and on our boards. And I'm the anomaly. I'm an interim president in part because I am the chair of Hecla, and when our CEO resigned, I became the interim president. But I think what the idea that even 5 years ago there would have been very many women who were chairing mining companies shows that push has been effective. And when we think about changing the perception of mining among young people Young people want to see a diverse workforce, not just at the working level, but at the management level and at the board level. And that's what they're able to see now.
Excellent. And for those of you in the room who came to see Kathleen, she's actually got called into a meeting with the president of Indonesia to talk about the new smelter that they have there. So she is on business. She wanted to express her regrets of not being here to speak with you as well. Okay, let's move on to the subject of innovation and really talk about the use of new and innovative technologies really been rapidly expanding in mining companies worldwide in order to create safer workplaces, improve productivity, access deeper, narrower, and more complex deposits at lower costs. So if you would, and Vicki, we'll start with you, please provide an example of how new innovation that you've adopted over the last year has resulted in benefits to your company.
So 1 minute for the juiciest topic, and I'll try
You
and
know
already
what,
wasted 10
you can go a little
seconds.
longer than 1 minute.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, there's a lot to talk about here, and I'll just highlight a couple of them. Sandvik's produced these underground battery electric haul trucks and loaders, and we've been testing them out our underground mine at Kennecott, and so that's all about worker health and safety, and of course not having that level of emissions. Same thing, Denise, in collaboration with Caterpillar, we've got Cat 793 battery electric big trucks over in Australia, and that's a collaboration between Rio Tinto and BHP, and we'll be mobilizing those in Q2 of this year. Down at our level at Resolution Copper, motor control centers. Doesn't sound that interesting, but this is all about arc flash prevention. So our partners at Eaton have come up with this remote racking system, so you can stand 25 feet away and the operator's out of the line of fire for the boundary for arc flash. And just thinking about remote deep mines, because there's nothing easy anymore, and Resolution is one, AI. How we're able to use machine learning and AI to take all the data that we have, the geological information, the geotechnical, and view it in a way that human brain, and certainly my brain, cannot imagine all of those things interacting with the rock mass. So that's just a little bit of a flavor of some of the things that we're looking at.
Thank you, Vicki. Very exciting. Paul?
This is another one that's hard to do in a minute because I think we're all passionate about this subject. I think we've all pursued things that limit exposure of our employees to either dust or dangers. And those are fascinating projects, and automation enters a lot heavily into that. And the other area that I think AI has yet to scratch the surface on is predictive maintenance and how we can apply that down the road and get better at these maintenance activities that we're all trying to do to come up with that little bit of percent improvement. But I think the one big project we've been focusing on is a pretty benign subject, which are the coal preparation plants. We build these huge facilities, and how do we make them as absolutely efficient as possible? And it's coming down to tenths of percent of recovery, getting that last bit of carbon out of the waste stream, and making the plant more efficient. Those are the focus areas that we're in.
Thank you, Paul. Mitch?
Yeah, it's an exciting topic. Yeah, it also, I think, kind of relates back to the workforce question from earlier. In our case, we have a team here this week scouring the floor for new ideas and opportunities to refill that pipeline of new business improvement ideas. We stood up at this team 4 or 5 years ago, and they have delivered tens of millions of dollars of savings, efficiencies, safety improvements. And that also, attracts the kind of people to our company when they can work in an area like that otherwise, might not take a look at our industry. We just completed a big expansion of a silver and gold mine in Nevada, northern Nevada, called Rochester. Big 3-stage crusher, and one of the things that we've implemented there is a predictive model through machine learning, some of the same themes that you two talked about, to help predict the product size that's coming through that crusher so that operators can make adjustments much faster than they ever could before. And that ends up getting then that product size that we need out to the leach pad to maximize the recoveries. So the ability to make better decisions faster using all this data makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it's exciting times. Mark, anything to add? from a...
Yeah, a little bit. I think, sometimes we get confused about promoting and delivery and innovation and automation, and this industry has a long way to go to become efficient. But what has happened is the automation side of it is starting, and things that we can celebrate is the fact that we mine remotely now from the surface, and that opens up the workforce, to Cassie's point about anyone competing for that job. And that's a great thing, and probably the most interesting project we've got at the moment is a joint venture with BHP and Anglo American and some of the contract miners and OEMs on the Kallio mine in Finland, and it's all about a future mine, because I think that's where we are. We've got lots of bits and pieces, but how do you put it all together? And it's interesting, one of the biggest focuses is what we call on-3, which is online, on demand, and on time. And that is maximizing the efficiencies and effectiveness of our people in a mine, so that we're using space technology, communication, repairs, maintenance, and how do we engage with people remotely, rather than have to always send an expert down there or get an expert to visit the mine. We can do it. And COVID taught us a lot about that, the power of remote engagement. And so that's an exciting frontier that's just starting to open up.
Yeah, it's amazing how that's transformed in a very short period of time. You want to wrap us up, Cassie?
Well, I'll just talk about a product that we are testing at our Greens Creek mine called Geologic AI, which is a core scanning technology that combines 4 instruments: X-ray fluorescence, hyperspectral shortwave length infrared LiDAR, and high-resolution photography or photographs. And the advantage of this product is the speed at which these data sets can be collected simultaneously, and then including collecting data continuously downhole. So at Greens Creek, the silver mineralization there is sometimes hard to visually identify, and our sampling protocol requires samples taken a certain distance from the ore zone. So this Geologic AI allows us to understand prior to sampling where the silver mineralization is, and that leads to reduced sampling. And in some cases, it also identifies mineralization that our sampling protocol might have missed and not identified. So we're looking at there, and we're looking to use it at our other mines.
Thank you. Thank you. Great examples of the leverage of technology and what it really can do to help the whole mining industry become more efficient and effective. Okay, I'd like to switch gears again and talk a little bit about meeting demand through investments in exploration and operational optimization. So if you read Deloitte's Tracking the Trends 2024, it says navigating global challenges and opportunities in mining and metals notes attitudes towards exploration are really currently a tale of 2 halves. In copper, a key metal to drive the energy transition, companies are focused on capital expenditures, on extending and expanding existing profitable assets rather than exploration for new projects. On the other hand, battery minerals and some precious metals have seen significant investment in exploration. So Mark, obviously gold mining, as well as I know you're expanding into copper, gold mining can be very different than copper. Given Barrick's robust exploration program, can you discuss how you prioritize your exploration activities around the world? Because you're going into some interesting jurisdictions.
Yeah, so our first mantra is asset quality overrides jurisdiction. So we look for what we call tier 1 assets. The industry's sort of taken that definition and dumbed it down a bit. But we really stick to that, and it's copper mines more than 5 million tons of contained copper, and gold mines more than 7 million ounces of gold. So that's our minimum. And then, exploration is like looking for a needle in the haystack. But the first step is to find the haystack, and then start looking for the needle. And the way to do that is there's only certain age groups of rocks in the world that'll be host to tier 1 gold and copper assets. And normally, with a few exceptions, they come together. And so that makes it a lot easier. And so I guess in line with the discussions today, North America is still extremely endowed in both those metals. And it's the regulatory restriction and litigation. In fact, the regulations in North America are probably the best in the world. But it's the litigation that stops the access and development of those assets. On the flip side, Africa is, and South America and the other developing continents all have endowment. And the latest one that we're starting to invest in is the Tethyan metalliferous belt in Asia, which has got as much potential, if not more, than the Andean copper belts in South America. But the whole thing when you go there is, I mean, getting back to the nub of things, if you want to have great mining companies, even if it's automated, you need mining engineers. If you want to find new deposits, you can have AI and all the other things, but you need geologists on the ground to find them. So, it always comes back to that highly skilled. If you want to put, if you want to pipe a house, you need plumbers. And I think this whole world's got away from that and thinks that it all happens remotely. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the nub of that's the theme of this conference, isn't it?
It is.
It's about people.
It is.
And I think that, and if you look at the ESG or sustainability, I like Cassie, vision on sustainability. Again, if we can't create a sustainable planet if we don't look after its people. And that's all the people, not just trying to put batteries into cars in California. That's not going to save the planet.
Well said. Okay, Mitch, you're up next. Core is consistently seeking the sweet spot between exploration and optimization of your existing projects. So what factors do you consider when you're finding the balance between the two of those?
Yeah. For a company our size, we have put more of a priority on the brownfields exploration side. If you look back over the last 5 years or so, we've invested roughly $300 million in exploration, which for a company our size is a lot. Probably 80 or 90% of that has been around existing mines, with the thought being, exploration drives optimization, right? You get those longer mine lives, then you can start to justify reinvestments into the operation to drive those efficiencies and those results, those costs down. And so we're always trying to find that balance around where can we allocate capital that can really drive the mine lives longer, so that we can then justify reinvesting to make the asset more efficient. And I think over the last 5 years, our resources have grown something like 45%. Our reserves have grown something like 35%. And as a result, then, we have invested in things like this Rochester expansion. Once you have that kind of a mine life, then you can justify, in the case of Rochester, a $730 million investment and get a return on it. But that exploration has to come first.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. So Paul, taking the question from a different angle and really turning back to, I think, the exciting and significant announcement concerning the combination of Arch and Consol. What is the right time for this combination? And what do you see as the advantages to this expansion in both footprint and in diversifying your offering?
I mean, the combination of Arch and Consol, I think, took a lot of people by surprise. And not so much that there was finally a combination of the U.S. coal industry, but the two of us. And you stand back in the United States, there's 4 or 5 publicly traded coal companies. They all trade at about the same multiple, and they all have a market cap of $2 to $3 billion. It's, we could argue about multiples and why they are what they are, but it is. And as we looked around the landscape and, tried to figure out what can we do that changes the game for our investors, not only by cutting costs, but also making a more larger investable company. The obvious answer was some sort of combination, and to go out and acquire companies is probably off the table for most of the coal industry. So a merger of equals was on the books, and you stand back and think about Consol. I don't think people put things together, and until we started talking about it, they said, "Well, God, that makes a lot of sense." But it came down to that culturally, the two companies are very similar. My good friend and counterpart at Consol, Jimmy Brock, who's been a part of the NMA for years, they ran very similar to us. They ran very safe, very environmentally well-run mines. And operationally, we were also very similar. We focused on very large, predominantly longwall mines that were on the very low end of the cost curve and that had very long lives. Then, you look at strategies. Arch and Consol had a very similar strategy. We both were very heavy domestic thermal producers, and Arch had evolved into much more of a coking coal-centric company and was definitely moving our West Elk product and everything we could out of Wyoming to the seaborne thermal market because that's where the growth was. Consol had a very similar story. They were a very strong domestic producer that needed to get into the international market, simply for the statistics I mentioned earlier. The U.S. is 60% of what it used to be, or 50% of what it used to be 10 years ago. The growth is overseas. So what Arch and Consol both had was export capacity in their ports. So you end up bringing those two together. And I'm clearly not an advocate of companies coming together for size. Being big is overrated, I'd say, in most of the industry. I think we all found that out in the last 10 years. But this combination does probably the most unique thing. And I think Jimmy and I came to the same conclusion. What else can we do that could save our shareholders somewhere between $110 and $140 million a year? And the answer was, there is nothing we could do individually, but as a combined company, that's what we believe the value of this proposition was, and that's why we entered into it.
Well, best of luck to you on the transaction getting across the finish line. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to take the opportunity to skip to the last question, which is really an interesting one on U.S. policy, and it's another lightning round. Lots of discussions in the administration and in Congress about the need to secure energy and mineral supply and supply chains in the U.S. and to reduce reliance on sources in China and Russia specifically. And certainly we saw what happened after the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, and even more so as China is currently flexing its mineral muscles in limits of exports on various minerals. So as you consider the top thing that the U.S. government could be doing right now to improve the business climate for the mining industry, what would you say that could be? And Cassie, we'll start with you.
Well, I would say since 1996, when we stopped funding the Bureau of Mine, we have not had a coordinated minerals policy in this country. So you get the DOD and the Department of Energy funding and supporting mining operations, and apparently the U.S. Forest Service and the BLM didn't get that memo. And so we've just got this schizophrenia. So I really would encourage, there's a new bill sponsored by Senator Hickenlooper to create a national materials council and make it a high-level executive council that coordinates energy and minerals policy in this country.
Thank you. Mark?
I think there are two. First is the federal government needs to accept that the United States is one of the biggest consumers of metals and minerals, and it's not China, and share that with its population. And the second one, to Cassie's point, is it needs a strategy, because there's a famous saying from one of my early mentors: if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And I think that's the status of the mining industry in the U.S. today.
Well said. Mitch?
Yeah, I think under strategy comes things like, permitting, regulatory certainty, federal land access. I'd put a plug in for expanding the list of critical minerals. That probably falls under strategy as well, but the metals that aren't on that list are real head scratchers, and I don't know if the government needs to be picking winners and losers. Make them all critical. They're all important.
Yeah, excellent point. Paul?
I think these are all good points. Permitting certainty is clearly one of the biggest issues out there. I'm all for having the stakeholders enter into these discussions and all voices being heard. But if there is no legal impediment or no, correct reason to deny a permit, there should not be an indefinite do loop of trying to stop things. And unfortunately, that's what we have in the U.S. is this inability to take a project that is legally and ethically and all the right things and not get it started. And we somehow got to bridge that gap for the very points that have been raised by the other panelists.
And wrap
Everything
us
my
up,
colleagues said times 1,000. And just the one thing, though, I think that would make it easier to just on the front end of the permitting, there's still just too much duplication in the federal permitting process. So if you have, an impacts that's subject to a permitting regime already where there's some substantive standards like Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, air permitting agencies issue those permits. State groundwater agencies issue groundwater permits and surface water permits, but federal agencies today duplicate that analysis in an EIS. It probably consumes at least 50% or more of what's consumed in a federal EIS process. And so if you take those out, and really what you're left with are procedural type of things like endangered species or NHPA and those types of things, make it much more manageable for federal agencies that are carrying a tremendous burden.
All right, well, thank you, Vicki. We are out of time. Would all of you please help me congratulate and thank our panelists today for a great conversation. Thank you so much for your attention. We appreciate it and hope you enjoy the show. Thank you.
Sometimes life feels like a battle that you're bound to lose. You're tired of your struggle, this road seems way too steep. Your wounds still cut